Hello and welcome to another episode of the Culture Hour. I am always excited to do these podcasts. However, I'm even more excited to have a friend and a colleague back on the show, Dr. Sarah Spradlin. She brought it before. She's going to bring even more to you today. I'm going to read you the bio here in a second. But again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Shelley Smith. I'm the proud owner of Premier Rapport, where everything about workplace culture matters. Because remember, culture is not built in a day. It's absolutely built every day. So today we are going to dive in. We're going to talk about resiliency, and we're going to talk about it through and I have to, I don't want to steal Sarah's thunder, so I won't reveal that. So, all right, let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Spradlin. So first of all, she is a dear colleague of mine in many ways, but one of which is Mission 60. So I love working with her and Jason Van Camp and the entire team. So Dr. Spradlin started her career in the United States Marine Corps. After nearly 10 years, she transitioned off into active duty to serve as the first Director of Administration and Workforce Development at the Marine Raider Training Center. As a U.S. Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, and currently she serves as a CEO, and I always get this wrong, Vitruvian Advantage. I think I said it right. And if you don't know, it's actually one of Richmond's longest standing, but also one of the biggest management consulting firms, very well known inside of Richmond, Virginia. She's recognized as a leading expert in study and application of emotional intelligence as it relates to talent acquisition, succession management planning, transformational leadership, and organizational resiliency. Let me tell you, she's an amazing woman with, she's full package. Man, she's a Marine, she's a beauty queen, she has a mind that is amazing. I mean, she's just #badass all the way around. If you can't tell, I love her and I respect her so much. Sarah, there is a whole lot more about you than that. So please add to anything from a bio perspective, and then we'll get right into the conversation. What do you want to add that the viewers know about you?
Shelley, thank you so much. I think one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we didn't touch on is I am a mom. I have 4 amazing kids, and as a Marine, we like to call it my fire team. So I have a fire team of 4 amazing kids that range in the ages of 5 all the way to 17. And so we got a full house. And so resiliency is really important for us.
This, you know what, we are being tested on levels I think we never thought. Well, I shouldn't say that to a Marine because you've been tested. But I think it's the full throttle of having literally everything is in this compact space, and you're just trying to tread water like on the daily and keep your sanity and do the right thing on all levels at the same time. So the word balance to me is a whole nother teeter-totter, conversation. So, yeah. All right. So today, guys, we are going to talk about resiliency in all kinds of avenues. And there's no better person, in my opinion, to talk to about it than Sarah. But I also want to mention, if you've not picked up Sarah's latest and greatest amazing book, with all kinds of tidbits inside of it, you need to do it. And then she's also inside of Deliberate Discomfort as well. So two amazing books. So anyways, here there's more here on Sarah and her resources. So Sarah, why don't you start by sort of defining and unpacking our conversation today, and then we're just going to dive in, and you're going to give us all kinds of things that we can do to remain resilient or become resilient through everything. So go.
Yeah, definitely. So, it's really interesting to me because I think right now, we're talking about change and how so much has changed, and this whole concept of new normal. But what I find fascinating is that one thing that you and I have talked about, and that I really build a premise off of, is that change is the only constant. So really this idea of oh my gosh, all this change and this new normal, it's just part of the consistency of change, right? It's it's just it's a different set of variables that we're now just being exposed to. Change really is constant. And I think, when we talk about change and we talk about resiliency and what it takes to continue to persevere, I always go back to one of my favorite quotes, and that's from Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin made the comment that, it's not the strongest nor the most intelligent that survive, but the ones most adaptable to change. Ultimately, right, those people that are, individually and collectively the most resilient and successful in the now and the enduring timeline of forever from now are the ones that can just constantly flex, that can adapt, that can shift a perspective. And I like to call it innovate on the pivot. And that's what we've had to do that all along. It's just a different set of variables that have created a new perspective of change. Because again, like I said, change is the only constant. So resilience isn't a new thing. It's just, we're just learning how to adapt to a new set of variables that are coming at us from the external world. And so,
Innovate on that needs to be a hashtag for you, or a whole new quote thing. Innovate on the pivot. I love that. Anyway,
I was talking to Lonnie Maines and Joe DeCina. So Lonnie Maines is the author of Red Shoes Living. Amazing book. If you haven't read it, you haven't picked it up. Red Shoes Living is a phenomenal book. And Lonnie does a lot of moderating for Spartan Race, the Spartan X leadership. And so Joe DeCina, who is the head of Spartan, with the three of us were on a similar podcast a couple weeks ago, and really focusing on those types of initiatives in terms of resilience. And that was, how I get excited and I get passionate about things, and I threw out innovate on the pivot. And Lonnie and Joe were like, I love that. So hopefully we've got the hashtag started out there somewhere. So innovate on the pivot. We're going to dive into that concept a little bit more here when we move forward on some concepts. But I wanted just to let you take over for a sec.
No, that's awesome. So talk to us about VUCA.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen some hashtags. Originally, I'll be honest, when I first saw it, I had to stop and look it up, and of course I completely got it, and it's definitely relevant right now. So why don't you begin to unpack that for people who have not heard of it, and give us some tips on how to maneuver through it and around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing a lot of this whole concept of a VUCA world, and we're living in this VUCA world. And VUCA is an acronym, and it stands for volatile or volatility, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and then ambiguity. And it goes back to, and actually the US War College is the place that started this concept. And it's really identifying the key characteristics of external variables. And that goes back to that initial, how we open this up, and we're talking about the idea that change is the only constant. So, we have been, and we still are, and we always will live inside a VUCA world. It's out there a lot right now, but the reality is it just hasn't changed. It just is such a global impact. But with all the variables that we're receiving, whether it be ourselves, others, the world around us, we're constantly living with trying to manage all of the volatility, mm-hmm. the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity of things, because change is the only constant. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important that we understand what VUCA is, because it's out there a lot right now, especially with business. Mm-hmm. And really, VUCA is really gotten really popular in terms of identifying different change management models, so that we can try to overcome some of those key elements of the external world. But for ourselves to really identify that this is a constant environment that we live in. It's not new. So how do we identify each element? What do we do with that, so that the next time what we perceive to be some massive thing like what we're dealing with right now happens, it doesn't kind of shock the system to such an extent, right? And we kind of can embrace that idea that hey, change is constant, and this is just a new set of variables. No matter how, the gravity that this has impacted on us, but that we can embrace it and really innovate on the pivot a little bit more frequent or efficiently than a lot of us have been able to with what's going on right now.
So one of the things, again, because of your knowledge base and your expertise around emotional intelligence and resiliency, I remember, I think it's maybe been a year ago when you had sent me a resilient type of assessment, and I love that. So can you correlate the things that are asked to measure one's resiliency, and from VUCA, really from the complexity standpoint, about how do I understand as a leader, where am I?
Yep.
And when I'm put into crisis situations or change management, help us define where are we, maybe kind of what does it mean, and give us some tips that you're talking to your clients right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to take us back to like a foundational set, right? So when we start talking about, whether it be crisis, which is extreme, management, or any type of change management initiative that we're dealing with, whether it be interpersonal or whether it be a business process, from a foundational standpoint, we go back to that idea that emotional intelligence is so unbelievably foundational. It really is, because just as change is the only constant, the one constant that we know impacts every thought we have, every decision that we make, and every action we take is emotional information. So we have a constant set of emotional information that we can actually battle the consistency of change, right? And so if you think about that, right? So if we use emotional information effectively, because that's the one thing that we're always dealing with, like it's constant in every change management situation, right? We can kind of use those two to anchor the notion that as we move forward, all this emotional information is always there and it's changing as this changes. And so we have to kind of walk the dog together with it. And we have to be able to manage the emotional information that's changing constantly, as change is the only constant. And really that idea of managing emotional information it's threefold. It's managing our own emotional information. It's managing the emotional information that we're receiving from others in a situation. And then it's managing the emotional information that we're receiving from the outside world, right? Whether those be signals, alarms, whatever other pieces it may be. And so we have to start with building a foundation of emotional intelligence in order to really manage crisis. And so if we can, if we can do one thing as a takeaway, my recommendation, and we've talked about this before, Shelley, is in every single situation, take a momentary pause. And whether that moment for you is a split second or whether it's a half an hour to a day, take your moment, whatever defines your moment, and apply what I call the Ei3 method, right? And I talk about it in the book. And Ei3 is really simple reminder to do three things that start with EI. First is to effectively and really efficiently identify all the dynamics of the situation. So stop and ask yourself, in this moment of change and chaos and elevated emotional information or whatever the circumstances may be, have I actually taken in all of the dynamics of the situation? Have I efficiently identified the emotional information from myself, from others, in the world around me? And then the part two of Ei3 is, because I want to engage insightfully in all those dynamics. So the first idea is the thought process of navigating that information, then being able to engage insightfully. If we haven't actually stopped and asked ourselves, hey, what is the emotional information I'm receiving from myself, others, in the world around me? There is no way we can engage insightfully. So step one is efficiently identify all those dynamics. Step two is engage insightfully, because the end result of the Ei3 method in that split second is to effectively influence a positive outcome, effectively influence whatever situation, no matter how big or small it might be. You want to be able to effectively influence that situation. And so, when we go to that foundational level of managing change and chaos and crisis, the first thing we have to ask ourselves, and consistently ask ourselves, is, have I applied the Ei3 method? Efficiently identify the dynamics, engage insightfully so I can effectively influence the outcome of a situation. And that's just something we can do personally, right? That's something we do personally as we're managing change. But then if we get back to this idea of VUCA, right? We now can actually break apart different components of a crisis situation or a chaotic situation or simply a change management situation. And we can break it apart into those 4 pieces: the volatile nature of things, the uncertainty of the situation, the complexity of the situation, and the ambiguity. And I really want to kind of just talk about one thing we can do in order to effectively influence each of those steps. So if we have a situation in front of us, right? I mean, you're at home and you're dealing with, a million spinning plates at one time right now because everybody's working at home. You're getting phone calls, you're managing, personal issues, you're managing maybe children and all kinds of stuff at the same time while you're trying to work. If there is a problem set in front of you, we can break it down in the VUCA set and we can take it one piece at a time. So we look at the volatile nature of a situation. We can counter volatility with a vision. The first thing we want to do is say, what is my vision? What is my plan? What is my problem? Because a lot of times when we're feeling overwhelmed or we're feeling like we're managing a massive situation, we don't even actually stop to ask ourselves, what is the actual problem? What is the systemic problem that we're dealing with right now? And so when we talk about the V in VUCA and the volatile nature of crisis and challenging situations, the first thing we can do is we can counter volatility with a vision. Ask ourselves, what's the problem? And then what's my end state? What's my vision? What do I want this to actually look like? How do I want to shape it, right? And create that vision. Mm-hmm. Once we kind of set that path in motion, the next thing we want to do is we want to focus on uncertainty. And we meet. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I want you to continue, but I'm sitting here thinking about conversations that I've had with people or questions, that are coming up. And so just to make it applicable for people who are listening, to your very first point is it could be a conversation that you've had and you're frustrated with maybe one of your direct reports not being able to hit deadlines, for example. So literally what I'm hearing you to suggest is stop and pause, get out of the frustration and go, why are they missing it? What am I, as the leader, the mentor, the manager, what is my onus in this? And how can I stop it? So getting to the root in order to digest what is happening in order to put the plan into place. Am I
absolutely?
Okay, so that could be an example. So go ahead and go to the next step. I just wanted to be able to give people to, it's like, how do I do this? Is she telling me to write this down? Is she telling me? So just a simple in the day. I know one of the most common questions that I'm getting now is that, managers are frustrated. How come some people are able to do it? And it's above and beyond the need for social or not. It's just that really high performing employees have become dysfunctional because they're not in their normal environment. So why are they becoming dysfunctional? And unpack it. Okay, sorry, go back.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those elements, the volatile nature of change is just, there's just such an inherently volatile nature of change. And now that we're all managing that, we really want to counter volatility with the vision. Mm-hmm. And just like you were saying, just take a minute and ask yourself, what is the actual problem, right? Lazy Susan it and say, this is how I see the problem. But I'm going to put the problem atop of Lazy Susan and I'm going to spin it And every time I spin it, I'm going to look at it from somebody else's perspective and see kind of where those threats and opportunities are from my own perspective as a leader, to see how I can fill those gaps and kind of, try to mitigate that. So, we got to figure out what the problem is, and then we got to create a plan. That vision, if you would. So we talked about V. We go to U with VUCA, and that's the uncertainty. And we meet uncertainty, right? That feeling of the reality is uncertainty stems from fear. And it creates fear. And actually, I said that backwards. Fear creates uncertainty, right? And it actually causes us to not want to approach it.
Right.
But the problem is that uncertainty is, and fear become that cyclic relationship, right? And that, downward spiral of negative repercussions. And so when we think about uncertainty, we're frustrated because we don't understand why they don't get it, whatever it is. We have got to really meet uncertainty with understanding, right? The anxiety and the fear and the frustration that all goes along with uncertainty can be mitigated with understanding. And so there's two elements to the understanding piece for leaders that are really important. And the first one is knowledge. Really, truly ask the questions. If you can't identify, on your own accord, talk to people. Just because we're social distancing doesn't mean we're any less required to maintain collaborative thought and ask the questions about, trying to fill uncertainty. Mm-hmm. But not just gaining knowledge in terms of, I have a question, let me get an answer, but empathy, right? So knowledge and empathy combined really helps to mitigate the uncertainty that we feel in this world of the unknown and change. And there's two pieces to empathy that are really important right now. And the first one is, we meet uncertainty with understanding. So we ask the questions, we get information, we get logical knowledge that's going to help us fill those gaps. And then we really have to stop and empathize. We have to ask ourselves, what are some of those other situations that other party is dealing with right now that may be negatively impacting their ability to manage, cope, comprehend in an efficient and effective manner. And just talk yourself through that from an empathetic leader's perspective. Mm-hmm. Really consider how the change is impacting other people mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, right? And how that knowledge or that information helps you understand better why things aren't being done in the way that you're wanting it to, or things aren't progressing. But it's not just about others, right? Right now, in this time where we are really dealing with so much change in terms of personal interaction, being in the office, having those support networks, all that kind of stuff, it is equally as important for us to self-empathize.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got to take the time, because we often find that the uncertainty and the frustration that we get in a VUCA world with uncertainty, right now, a lot of it's coming from us.
I was going to say, we are the center of the hot mess and the tornado that's being created around us. I wrote down, when we first started this conversation, anytime I have a conversation with you, I always use it as a therapy session for myself as well. So full disclosure. But one of the things that I've always worked on is, and continue to work on, is two things that you've touched on, one directly and one indirectly, and conversations that I've had with clients even more so over the last year. And it is around the empathetic part. I've literally had leaders say to me, what do you mean I need to be empathetic? What does empathy have to do with leadership and motivation? And so it's interesting to bring that into this fold. And then the other part of it is impulse control. So going back to the emotional intelligence. So for me, those are the two things, I'm not below the technical, bell curve norm, but for me, those are things that I'm always working on.
Yeah.
And they go hand in hand even more through this. And I even find myself, who I pride myself in being, self-driven and resilient, but that empathetic side and that need for impulse that leads into some of the unknown, the ambiguity, where I'm such a big risk taker, I'm finding that is freezing me and making me dysfunctional around this. And it's some of the common things that I'm seeing and I'm reading and I'm hearing people, call on. And one of the things that I've learned to do, to your point around, I had to write some of these things down, of that vision piece and being able to see where you on the empathetic scale for yourself before you can give to others. Because if you're not in tune to yourself, you certainly can't give to others. I literally started writing them down on flip charts and sticky notes to kind of, where am I in that? How did I kind of create that? And so that's something that I've encouraged clients to do. And again, you're the expert when it comes to this piece. Is that the right suggestion to do? Because if not, if I don't write it down, honestly, I can't figure it out. I've got to be able to see the circles that are like overlapping to go, there it is. There was the hit or the miss. And here's how I need to pivot now, to your point, to create a new vision, a new plan, a new process.
Yeah,
absolutely. On point or off point here?
Oh, absolutely, Shelley. I mean, you got it. I mean, the ability to write it down, that whole concept of meet uncertainty with an understanding, both, technical knowledge as well as, empathetic understanding of others and yourself. I mean, self-reflection is just such a massive part of it. And in all of these pieces in the VUCA cycle are so synergistic, right? So, I mean, your ability to actually write this stuff down and look at it and step away from it and say, how does my own understanding of how I, do X, Y, and Z impact all of this other stuff is a massive part of starting to mitigate that anxiety and fear associated with uncertainty. I mean, self-reflection is a huge element of understanding. It's, again, emotional intelligence is about really being able to manage emotional information from yourself, others, and the world around you. So you have to be able to understand yourself before you can really understand how you influence anybody else or how anybody else influences you. Our perception of reality is a moment in time based on, it's a fascinating concept. And it goes back to, well, if I don't really understand how I see myself and I don't understand how others see me, I don't really, I don't really have a solid baseline. So my recommendation on that is not only write it down, pick it apart, but get somebody else to take a look at it. Right? I mean, because the idea is if that perception of yourself is linear, right? And it's just based on your experiences and what what to be right or wrong. And I know that my challenges and my obstacles personally are definitely looked at differently by myself than they are by my colleagues and my peers or my family. So I have them take a look at it. And that adds a whole new level of understanding to mitigate the uncertainty that we deal with.
And you've got to be ready, willing to listen to what that feedback is as well. I love that technique as well. I tell people that once they've done that and they're ready to kind of put it out there to people who are really going to give them honest feedback is to use, language like, listen, I stopped and I reflected on our most recent conversation. And, this is what I realized I did in that, it didn't go so well. And this is my takeaway. And this is the role I played in that. I apologize or let me restate it. But, can we come back and can we restart? And again, own it. Just own it and be transparent that wasn't my intention, or this was my intention. This is my reflection. And then toss it over to them and then stop, pen and paper in hand and be ready to understand what it is being said and restate, to your point, restate the new vision so we can lay out what the plan is and get back on track. And I think the quicker people are doing that, the better off the teams are now. The ones that are letting it go and fester are the ones that the teams are being pulled further apart versus collaborating in closer together, you know, owning that transparency when, hey, that, you know, yesterday's call was a miss. Let's get back on the same page. This was my role. It wasn't the role I wanted. Let's start over again and literally pass the baton, you know, in that shared leadership piece. So again, just some day-to-day, you know, applicability.
Yeah.
What are some other specific techniques or tips that are simple that people can be doing or should be doing right now?
Yeah. So one thing I really want to touch on real quick before we go there is, you know, we talk about feedback. And feedback is, no matter how you cut it, we all know that it is wickedly powerful, but it is really tough. Right. And so when we talk, yeah, right. And so it's, here's something that I just want all the listeners to really just soak in for a second. The nature of feedback is that we are hardwired. We are literally hardwired to shy away from both giving and receiving any type of criticism, even in constructive in nature. We are literally, our brains, every single one of us are hardwired to shy away from it. Because when you know, from a primitive and caveman type standpoint, the idea of being told you're wrong was actually a threat, right? It was a threat in our brains to our position in the pack. We are pack animals, right? And it's a threat to our physical safety. It's a threat to our survival almost, because if we are told you're wrong or you're not a part of this, you're potentially a threat to the pack, you're out, right? And so not being accepted in terms of pack mentality, we are hardwired to see that as a threat to our survival. And if you can stop for a second and really appreciate, you know, I wish we had a picture of Maslow's hierarchy of needs right now, because, you know, most people, and rightfully so, assume that when we receive feedback that's, you know, not perfect and beautifully, you know, positive in nature, that we actually take it as kind of like a threat to our self-esteem or maybe our self-actualization, which is pretty high up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
But if you really do the research on how our brain works, being criticized in any manner is way down on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. And it is literally a threat to our physical safety and belongingness. So it's not up there. It's way down here. It's super primitive. And the moment that you can stop and really just like embrace the notion that it's completely natural and normal that we don't like to be criticized, it's this like ability to just kind of relent control and we can start to invite feedback a little, you know, just a little more willingly. Hey, you and I dislike it equally because our brains are hardwired to not want to receive it. Neither of us want to feel threatened from existence or threatened from the pack. And so again, I think it's so powerful to just stop and say, oh, it's totally okay and totally natural that none of us want to hear anything that isn't positive about our self-image.
Right. So we're normal.
We're totally normal.
It's totally normal. You know, that you said the word belong and belonging. I literally am in the middle of writing a blog about belonging, because right now part of that unknown is the fact that we don't know where we belong, what we belong to. From the simplicity of people talking about their hair and their nails, of what do I own, what do I not, and you know, for me, I always talk about seen, valued, and heard. So it is that belonging of where do I belong in the picture of my organization or my freaking household right now. and am I helping and am I hurting? And it goes to the core of what it is that that you were talking about.
Yeah. And
That's
so
how our conversations just kind of go. And I hope our viewers are listening, are like, it's like squirrel, but it's an intentional squirrel conversation. So,
and with that in mind, I get back to your point about what are some of the small things that people can be doing, right? So we put that out there about, we've got through the idea of meeting, really the volatility, counter volatility with the vision, right? And then we've hung on to meeting uncertainty with understanding for a while because it's so important right now, right? I mean, the new normal, we're redefining what our knowledge base is. We're creating a whole new set of understanding of how we do things, how others are doing things, why they're doing it. And then we touched on the idea of, right, when we start self-reflecting and asking others to take a look at, hey, do you see what I see? And we start getting feedback. That's where I want to go with what are some of the little things right now. Okay. Everybody is feeling out of whack, but we all have an inherent need to belong, to be accepted, to be a part of the pack. So when we talk about one thing we could do right now, leaders, get out there and give feedback. Squash the sense of uncertainty, foster a sense of belongingness, even if it's negative or constructive in nature. Get it out there and remind them, I am here and providing you this feedback because you're a part of this team and I want to make you better. Push feedback, right? You can't, at this point, we can't over communicate, right? I mean, we're at the point where we just can't over communicate, right? As long as we're doing it effectively.
Yeah, I don't want to derail us again, but I think that feedback and leaning into that as a leader is the leader saying, I'm giving you feedback because you do belong. Yep. And I do care and I do empathize with you. And I don't know all the answers right now, but let's work on this together. Yep. But right now I'm focusing on you. And just be transparent about that. Yeah. But the reason I'm giving you feedback is I care.
Absolutely. And then vice versa. Ask the question, what do I need to do differently? Yeah. Right? What resources do you need that I don't even realize you need right now because of all of the uncertainty that we're dealing with? And if we don't have an understanding of what that is, we're going to continue to perpetuate this anxiety and frustration and, all of that kind of stuff. So, right now, feedback is so critical, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. Feedback is going to drive that sense of belongingness, sense of acceptance. It's going to mitigate that anxiety associated with being excluded from the pack. And we'll start to, really kind of create that catalyst for just managing the VUCA world. So we touched on V, we touched on U, and now we're talking about complexity. And I think it's really important that before we dive in to complexity, we identify the notion that there is a difference between being complex and being complicated. So right now we are dealing with the complexity of, being at home. Complexity is multifaceted, right? There are a lot of different moving parts to a complex system, right? Where, things are, maybe interconnected or multi-level, different processes that come together to create complexity. But complexity doesn't necessarily mean it's difficult.
Okay.
And I think we need to just stop and appreciate that when we talk about complexity, which is, a multifaceted and complicated is difficult. Things that are difficult are complicated, right? We can use that as a synonym. Yeah. But not everything that is complex is or has to be difficult.
And I think you're turning the complex into the complicated when it's not, to your point. Oh my gosh, I love that. Totally resonates.
So if we haven't addressed all of the uncertainty of the situation and we don't get a better knowledge and understanding of things, we absolutely start to turn things that are complex into complicated, right? So these kind of start to build on one another. And the other thing is we go all the way back to the V, right? And we talk about the volatility. We meet volatility with a vision. If you stop and ask yourself, what is the problem? In that moment, we can also ask ourselves, is it complex? Is it complicated? Or is it both?
Mm-hmm.
And what facets of a complex problem are complicated? Because not every element of a complex problem set is complicated or difficult. And so we can start breaking all of this apart and asking ourselves these questions so that we can prioritize how we want to go about the issues as leaders that we're having, right? The complexity of virtual meetings, right, requires a lot of moving parts, but it doesn't have to be complicated, right? But if maybe, for example, there's one element of, all of the virtual meetings or something that is complicated, let's figure out what it is, and we can start to peel it apart with rules and procedures, and right, something that is complicated. We can create a rule set and a schedule and a routine that can start to limit some of the difficulty or get rid of it, right? To eradicate the difficulty. So I wanted to start with the notion that complexity and complication are two different things. And it's really important that we identify where the complication or difficulty is in a complex system, and not just say, oh, well, it's really complex, which means it's all really difficult, because it's not. And so when we talk about dealing or responding to the complexity of a situation, that's where we start talking about responding to complexity with clarity.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. And really, it's that idea of, all right, this goes back to the emotional intelligence element of objectivity, right? Seeing the relative nature of the situation. Stop and ask yourself, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how chicken little the sky is falling is this problem set. Not everything can be chicken little the sky is falling. Not everything, because we have to be able to stop and take the problem set and say, all right, I need to create some clarity, and I need to look at this from a relative nature, an objective standpoint. What is the worst, most dramatic situation I've been in as a leader? And you start to create these left and right lateral limits, and now you kind of start saying, okay, all right, this isn't nearly as complex as I thought it was. Mm-hmm. Right? Or maybe there's minimal complexity, it's just complicated, and we can start to pull it apart.
Yes.
And this is really where we get into collaboration.
Yeah.
When you start to see something that is complex and you stop and ask yourself, okay, is this really as overwhelming as I think it is? Let me just kind of pull back on this, get some clarity. Chicken little, the sky is not falling. Let me bring some folks in, and let's start to collaborate on this. Let's get a broad collaborative sense of clarity to the complexity of the problem set that we're dealing with. And that is so important.
I absolutely love that. And before you even said it, that's absolutely where my head was going with. That's when this shared leadership mindset absolutely needs to come in. It's kind of like pulling the puzzle pieces apart and then delegating out to your team in tasks to go, you've got the corners, you've got the rest of the edges, you're going to gather the colors together. Again, just to kind of give another metaphor of simplicity. So you and I could keep going, and we may have to do another version of this, but let's go ahead and start to put a wrap on today. So what are some of your final thoughts, other recommendations, and let's put a bow on this.
All right, so here's my bow. My bow is we just got to touch on A. We covered V, U, C, A, right? So when we talk about ambiguity, we combat, or we really we attack ambiguity with agility. We have got to be able to we've got to flex. We've got to be able to relent control that there's only one right way. Right? We've got to be able to flex. We've got to be able to innovate on the pivot. If we cannot innovate on the pivot and say, I can find something really innovative or really powerful, or, you know, that'll propel us forward, even just one tiny little bit, if we can't stop and say, I'm going to find the positive in this situation, you know, we freeze, we're stuck, just like you're talking about, right? So we have to combat, you know, and attack ambiguity with agility. And that is such a massive part of emotional intelligence, and being able to say, all right, let's look at this from another perspective. We're going to innovate on the pivot. We're going to make this happen. All right. So here, we're going to wrap this up when we start talking about, you know, resilience and living in this VUCA world that really we've always lived in. Right. It's just, it's the shock and awe of it right now.
Obvious.
Yeah. You know, one, we got to embrace the notion that really emotional intelligence is foundational.
Yep.
Two, we've got to stop and ask ourselves, have I applied the Ei3 method in everything I'm doing right now? Because emotional information is high, and when emotions are high, logic is low. So we've got to be able to stop and ask ourselves, have I efficiently identified the dynamics of the situation so I can engage insightfully in the situation and really effectively influence a positive outcome? Next, when we talk about breaking apart those problem sets in a VUCA world, we got to counter volatility with a vision. We're going to ask ourselves, we're going to stop, and we're going to ask ourselves, what is the problem and what's the plan, right? The second one, we're going to meet uncertainty with understanding. That's not just knowledge, that's not just technical knowledge, but that's empathy. Being able to empathize with others and self-empathy. See that complexity of the nature is really stopping and finding clarity. Is it complex? Is it complicated? Is it a little bit of both? And how am I going to delegate and collaborate in order to move forward? And then finally, like we said previously, we're going to attack ambiguity with agility. We're going to innovate on the pivot. We're going to get through this together.
Oh my gosh, those were all like amazing sound bites that you need to, I feel like there is like a song, you need to get a rapper and to bring all that together. With innovate on the pivot. It's a VUCA world. I like so many different, I could start rapping now, but people would get really scared and never do it.
I'm not even going to try it.
Yeah. So thank you so much for all of this really great information today. And again, I don't think I verbalized the title. I'm looking down again at your book. First of all, I love the cover again, but Emotional Intelligence, the intersection where the warrior meets Wall Street by Dr. Sarah Spradlin. I love it so much. And again, you've got a couple of deliberate chapters into no pun of deliberate discomfort, how a U.S. Special Operation Forces overcome fear and dare to win by getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, which is absolutely what we're doing today, by Jason Van Camp and Andy Simmons and a whole bunch of veterans and science officers such as ourselves. So if you have not grabbed the copies of those books, they are both incredibly relevant for what you're living personally and professionally right here today. And you absolutely can use them to take them into, I call it the new normal, because we've been going through, you know, like the stages. People are like, is that a typo? No, that's not a typo. The new normal as we talk about reentry. So thank you again, Dr. Spradlin, dear colleague, inspirational badass, and definitely dear friend. We thank you so much for being on here today. And that's it. We thank you.
Thanks,
any final close, any final comment other than you say it one more time, innovate on the pivot through your voice.
Innovate on the pivot.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, guys. If you got any questions, follow up for Sarah. Sarah, where is the best way for people to contact you directly?
Yeah, definitely. So you know what, if you guys either get on the website, you guys can hit me up via my corporate website. It's vitruvianei.com. So if we, you know, just go ahead and Google Vitruvian Advantage, that's the company. Otherwise, you can always email me at sarah.spradlin. Shelley, if you want to, you know, put this up or anything, sarah.spradlin@vitruvianei.com. So it's vitruvianei.com. sarah.spradlin@vitruvianei.com.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Remember, culture matters. It starts with people, which starts with you as a leader. Cannot be done on the daily. It has to be deliberate. It has to be intentional, because if not, You're going to have leaks. You're going to have cleanups. And who wants to do repair? Nobody ever wants to do repair. So do it right to begin with. That's it. Peace out.